Downfall, conquest of the Third Reich. This is a game about World War II in the West. The main scenario, the campaign scenario, starts in 1942 and continues until the end of the war. You also have the Husky scenario and the Overlord scenario, which are shorter. And the map is pretty big. It is two large paper maps that they placed on the floor here, and they do represent, well, Europe, of course, but we also have North Africa, and then we abstracted other areas such as the South Atlantic and the Middle East, and the US is up there. Now, the game is rated pretty low on solitaire value, on solitairability. Probably because of the importance of card play and action cards that you have here. But frankly, I found no problem playing the game solitaire. I played it solo, two-handed, and there was a lot going on. And I was pretty excited and entertained. I didn't find card play to be a problem. But again, not everybody likes two-handed war games with card play. Another interesting thing about this is this. We take for granted that Germany is going to fall, and so that there is going to be a crunch around Germany coming from different directions. Germany's going to fall, and the players are going to take the control, therefore, of mainly the Western powers and the Western allies and the Soviets. However, each player will also control the other side of the German defenders. So the Western Allies player also controls the German defenders on the eastern side, and the Soviet player will also control the German forces in France, in Western Germany, in Italy, and in North Africa. You also see that there is sea all around. That is not used in all scenarios, but if you're playing the campaign scenario, well, then it's to me that's it adds complexity, but I really enjoyed how it added the logistical elements, because then you have interceptions, then you're gonna try it as the Western German defenders and their allies to ship things, hoping that the Italians deliver stuff to North Africa, which is not gonna work so well. Then you have to worry about shipping your American forces through the Atlantic, and the submarines there are pretty scary. And you will see around the board that there are several tracks. One is called Strategic Bombing, the other one is Battle of the Atlantic, and then we have the Siege of Malta. And of course, they abstract these quote-unquote sideshows. There's going to be a procedure that will allow players to influence these tracks, and as they move, they change the availability of certain game pieces. For example, how many ships are in the Mediterranean, how many submarines are available in the Atlantic, that sort of thing. We have units. It takes quite a while to set up, so I'm not going to set it up for you. Sorry about that. But we have these counters. They look pretty neat. Again, they may represent ships, but most of them will represent land units. They may have things such as badges indicating the quality, and they have a number of pips indicating how many strength points they have. Now, this is interesting because usually I saw this mechanism mainly in block war games, where there will be a block standing there and you rotate it to indicate losses or reinforcements, replacements. And here it works exactly the same, but just two-dimensional that way. And so you just have to keep track of the orientation and that's all that there is. Another interesting thing is that these pieces are single-sided, although it doesn't look that way, because, for example, armor is not a separate piece. Armor is an upgrade, and so you can spend resources, specific actions, for example, to turn this to strength game piece into armor, which is pretty neat. And if it takes hits, it is downgraded again, and then possibly again that way. This game uses several interesting mechanics that, frankly, I've never seen in a war game before, and I've seen them, though, in Euro games. In particular, if you played Tokaido, Namiji, or other games of that kind in which the last player on the track goes next, well, this is exactly what happens here, but the mechanism is used to represent initiative. You're going to have a track up here, the initiative track, as you see there, and you're going to have initiative markers for the 4 parties. And suppose random, I'm going to place it kind of randomly like that. Booyah. The player who is behind in the initiative track goes next. So now it would be this part of the German defenders, the ones allied with the Western Allies, controlled by the Western Allies. So this group goes and takes an action which, suppose, costs enough initiative points to place them there. Then the Western Allies go and suppose they take an action that costs 5 initiative points. So there's a variable number. Some may be very big, and so the Soviets take a really small one. And then, booyah, these guys go all the way there because they took a huge action. So variable number of initiative points, and so it's possible, like in games of this kind, that somebody will go more than once. So, for example, if the Soviets now take an action that costs a single initiative, they will resolve it, the initiative marker goes there, and then they can take another turn and they go wherever that is needed. There's also a marker that indicates the weather, and when the weather is behind, then you will move it forward, roll dice to see where it goes. And as it moves that way, the weather marker will pass certain thresholds, say that one, this is start weather 2, and that will trigger different weather. For example, if we are in turn 5, the turn starts with fair. Once the weather marker passes the threshold, the weather 2, then it becomes muddy, then it becomes fair again. And so as you can see, that's how the weather changes. Also, you may have noticed those event boxes there. When an initiative marker passes its own event, it goes on this side as a reminder that after you complete the action, you need to resolve an event. After you resolve the event, you go that way. The event system is very neat and very ingenious, but we gotta move down here to take a look at it. We have one event deck with not all cards in it at the beginning of the game. And so we have a discard pile, an active event, and an upcoming event. These two are face up. This is a single card. And here you have the deck, the draw deck, and you place that one face up. So what happens? What do we have here? We have first a certain number of air symbols, and the ones that are visible across all of these 3 cards are the number of air markers that you're going to place on the board. So that changes as the game progresses, goes up and down, and that will give you air superiority. So that's pretty neat. This is the event that you just resolved, and this is the next event that you know is going to come. These symbols here also indicate the amount of action cards that players are going to get. Actually, those are the ones that the cards in those action decks change as the game progresses. Some will be added depending on the turn. And so when it's time for an event to be resolved, I'm not going to give you the whole procedure, but the general idea is that you're going to resolve that event, and then you're going to see what the next one is, give cards to people based on that, and then again reconcile the number of air units on the board. So that's for that. So we said you're gonna use your initiative markers to select actions, and that will give you a variable number of will cost you a variable number of initiative points. But how do you select the actions? That's another element, that's a mechanism which I've seen in Euro games, not in war games before. Here you have an action track. As you can see, starts there indicated as indicated by that arrow. And then you're going to have a bunch of action markers, which are usually in an opaque container, and they are here instead for now. When it is your turn, you will select a marker from the action track, one for your party. Suppose now I'm activating the Soviets, so that one is available, that one is available, and that one is available. Each has a number of initiative points that I have to pay for it, as indicated on a play rate and also on a section on the board. So it's going to be very easy to retrieve. And so when you select a certain marker, you will pay the number of points indicated there. So for example, here, this is that marker, as you can see. So that will cost me 10 initiative points, plus one initiative for each of my own markers ahead of that one. So for example, that would cost me 11 now. So I have an incentive maybe to get this one, but if I want to get another one sort of like out of schedule, it's going to cost me more. Once you select your marker, pay the cost initiative, then you resolve it. For example, this one allows me to move units and up to 3 movement points and to perform 2 attacks. And these are the units that need to be involved in the attack. Here I can try to add partisan markers to the board, and they will help me immediately. For example, they deny some advantages to the defender if there are partisans in the back, in the rear lines. But also important at the end for victory points. You want to have a lot of partisans supporting you politically. This one, just movement. And different parties, different factions have different actions. I mean, everybody has combinations of moving and attacking. Everybody has some form of recruiting, but only the allies have partisan warfares. The different sections of the German army may try to weaken each other, which of course is unproductive, but again, you're not caring about everything. Strategic warfare, very important. That's how the Allies and the Germans try to influence these things here. Also, the Western Allies, by doing strategic warfare, will collect transport points that are needed later to land in ports because they have a number of transport cost there. So, these are the general ideas. It's a fairly involved and complicated game in which you will move your initiative marker to perform actions as indicated by the marker you selected. Go and resolve, move and attack and move, or only attack, plus influencing things on the board, such as, building beachheads and affecting the Battle of the Atlantic, recruiting partisans, moving them around, etc., etc., etc. A lot going on. And you wonder, how do you win? Well, victory is based on control of objectives. And so you can see there are a lot of those. There are more in North Africa, more in the north up there, and so on and so forth, and or victory conditions that may be triggered by certain event cards. Oh, combat, you ask? Yes, we didn't talk about that. Combat differential. You're going to have one attacker, one unit with auto modifiers such as supporting units, tanks depending on the weather, if you're German, that sort of thing. There are modifiers that are independent from attacker or defender, and then also modifiers for the defenders, especially terrain. And so that's going to give you the modifiers for the strength, and so you're going to have the differential, which becomes a column on a combat results table. You roll a die, that is modified by other things, mainly supply and weather. And you have little tokens if you're worried, like I'm not going to remember column 3, -2, that sort of thing. You're going to have those tokens. And at the beginning, it feels a bit laborious to go through all of those, but after you've done 10, 15, 20 combats, you're not gonna need that player rate anymore. And maybe in the long run, after a while, I forgot one thing here, one thing there, and so some combats were like one column up. But I think in the big scheme of thing, when you look at the bell or the curve or whatever you're gonna call it, I don't think that's gonna be a big deal. That is to say that similarly to a lot of other things in the game, combat feels cumbersome and feels like there's a lot to it at the beginning, but then it flows actually very well. This is like a metaphor almost for the entire game because it's demanding. There are 40 pages of rules. Even seasoned grognards don't read those every day. The map is large. The game is long. You can expect 12, 15 hours easy for a campaign game, which means you need a place to leave it set up. So it's not going to be for everybody. But if you're willing to put in the work and to deal with the logistics, setup time is its own thing. Then it's a very rewarding. And it's not a true monster, but it's a semi-monsterish game about a monster event. And honestly, if I'm putting in the effort to play a game with this level of complexity and this kind of length, it has to be a game that teaches me something and that shows me the complexity of something that is relevant and important, as of course this conflict was. And this game does that very well. The systems, the subsystems, the objectives, the incentives, the resources, everything is just functional to give you, yes, a very detailed, a very insightful image of this macro event. It really makes sense based on the resources and incentives to go to North Africa and then maybe to jump to Italy, but not go maybe all the way. Rome is a good objective. Then, well, start worrying about going to France. Meanwhile, the Soviets have an not to say not easier job, but it is more straightforward. Keep pushing, get those guards after a while, which is super neat. Sponsor partisans around the world. So definitely the two sides are not equal as they were not historically, because the Soviets are going to be about fighting and maneuvering the whole time, and the Allies have a lot more of a strategic element to take into account. The Western Allies, the strategic element, the supply element, the logistics of transferring things and dealing with those beachheads, turn them into mulberries maybe, and so on and so forth. So it's really neat that you have such a asymmetrical gameplay. And you're controlling, of course, the other part of the German defenders. As the Germans, you're probably not, and the other Axis forces, you're not gonna do a lot of pushes. You're gonna threaten supply lines, for example, but it's more likely that you're gonna be threatened with being surrounded than the other way around, for example. But it's a neat idea, actually. But again, the neatest ideas is how you have those action selection chits that cost different kinds of initiatives, and the Tokaido kind of initiative mechanic, which is just excellent. I love how I say it in Euro games. I never thought it could be applied here, but it just gives you so much. Recruiting, mechanizing, awesome, but it's gonna take a long time. However, maybe there is mud on the ground, maybe there is snow, so I can kind of exploit that, preparing for the big spring offensive. Every single element of the game comes together so well and so thematically. Again, the weather, the logistics, the technology, the politics, as hardwired into the event and the various checks that those events do. I'm really impressed. It's just a phenomenally captivating game for a wargamer who is willing to put in the work. This is what a war game should be, because it's like packed with decisions, packed with history, packed with Chrome, and everything just comes together so smoothly, so beautifully. I think it's a phenomenal game. It can be played solo. I played it solo. As long as you don't bother, two-handed card play, because you play those cards for various kinds of effects to affect the combat, for example. But you know what? There's so much going on that as I was playing the Soviets, I definitely forgot what the other German side had in their hand, and that's how it worked for me. If you have a problem with that, you can always roll a die. The old rule: decide to play a card, roll a die. On a one, you don't play it, and that's as simple as that. You always had that little bit of doubt there. But Downfall, it is a complex, demanding war game, but one that is worth getting into.